Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy CX Day. We're so pleased that you're here to join us. We're having a great conversation today with Ian Golding, joining us from England, and we'd love to welcome you to this event. We're going to spend about 45 minutes talking about the evolution and changes we're seeing in the CX profession. First thing we'd like to do, however, is thank our sponsors for supporting us in our efforts and supporting the profession. So thank you very much. Let's leap in. Ian, would you like to give us a little introduction to you and who you are, for those of you who don't know you?
Yes, hi Diane. It's lovely to speak to you as always. I am, for anyone that doesn't know me, a huge advocate of the CXPA. I'm one of the inaugural members of the CXPA back in 2011, and I am an independent customer experience specialist. I've operated independently around the world for 5.5 years and spent 17 years before that pushing water uphill on the inside of organizations. So I've been in and around the world of CX for a long time.
Fantastic. And for those of you who don't know, I'll introduce myself, Diane Magers. I'm the interim CEO for the CXPA. I, like Ian, have been in customer experience for a long time, longer than I like to admit sometimes, and also worked in brands, pushing that same wet rope up the hill, but also working in organizations and helping to create thought leadership in this space. So it's really a pleasure for you to join us today. I will encourage you to type questions in as we go. Ian and I will just be having a back and forth, very informal conversation talking about our topic today, but we'd love it if you would ask questions, and I'll pose those up to you, Ian, as we go through this time frame.
Perfect.
So I think the thing that a lot of people would want to hear from us is, what have we seen change? We're celebrating the 5th CX Day and celebrating our profession, but what have we seen change in the world as it relates to our profession?
And it's a brilliant question, and I hesitate to answer it because whilst I would love to say that we live in a world today where we are all having regularly brilliant experiences that we're remembering for the right reasons, those people who do know me know that I can only work within the realms of realism. And interestingly, I've written 2 articles actually in sort of celebration, I suppose, of CX Day. And one of the things I wrote may be seen by some as being slightly controversial, because I'm essentially challenging as to whether or not what we're seeing today in 2017 from a customer experience perspective is actually any different to what we were experiencing as customers in 1997 or even 1987. I say controversial because, of course, things have changed. You know, the advance in technology has made it a lot easier for us to do many things in our interactions with organizations. However, the big however is the reality is that every single day, I personally, and I'm sure you are as well, Diane, having experiences that are still so far from meeting my basic needs and expectations. And actually, that's no different to 20 years ago. So, yes, customer experience is evolving and continuing to evolve, but sadly, the reality is that we are a million miles away from being in a world where we can rely on having experiences that will meet our basic needs and expectations as often as we need them to.
That's incredible. So nothing but opportunity is what you're saying. We still have a long way to go.
You know, and you're definitely glass is half full, and sometimes I do feel as though I'm glass is half empty. This is absolutely about opportunity, but I think without question the only way we're going to leverage the brilliant technology that's coming in is by developing our profession, the skills and competencies that we possess to enable organizations to stop talking about it and actually making customer experience a sustainable reality. Because the truth is, the reason why things are still largely the same, other than technology, is because too many organizations do not possess the skills and competencies and are failing to actually change the way businesses work.
You know, that's one thing, Ian, I think we've talked about many times when we've been together is customer experience or experience in general, even employee experience, has been a catalyst for changing the way organizations work. And so for all of our efforts about how we handle the touch points and we, you know, fix things and we listen to the customer and we make those changes, it has really become about organizational design and those organizational competencies, the ability to work together, share information, become more agile, all of those pieces that are really more of a transformation driven by what we've been doing. So I think you're right. What would you say has been the synthesis of that, right? How do CX professionals now develop competencies around that? That seems like a really big.
But that I suppose. I mean, it's is it the $1 million question? I mean, you know, ultimately, transformation is a word that many businesses don't like hearing, and because transformation is it almost suggests that there's something wrong fundamentally, and we've got to totally change the way we operate. And actually, that is correct. You know, the way, especially most legacy businesses were created, was not to put the customer and colleagues at the heart of everything they do. That's not how most organizations were created in the beginning. And as a result, they are going to have to transform. They are going to have to metamorphosize into something that is now better suited to meeting the needs and expectations of a population of people that's changed. You know, the one thing that is inevitable in any organization is change. Nothing stays the same. And, you know, I worked for GE many years ago when Jack Welch was still CEO, and it was drummed into me that what the customer wants today will be different tomorrow. And it's absolutely right. You know, nothing stands still. And what we continually see are organizations who are failing to transform, who are either failing to transform because they don't believe they have a problem in the first place, or because they're either too pig-headed and ignorant to see the need to change. But, you know, when it comes to customer experience, nothing will ever stop. We've never done it. We've never finished. We've got to continually evolve and transform to survive. And the people that need to be able to share that message are the people that do what we do. It's our profession that needs to keep educating organizations to understand that this is not a one-off exercise. This is not an initiative. This is not, you know, the year of the customer. This is for life. And it takes our passion, our drive, our commitment to make this a reality.
Do you think a lot of folks that may be on the call listening or tuning in here, if they're new to the profession, did they really understand the amount of change? And if they, as you said, if there's new competencies or capabilities they need to develop, how do they understand how to deal with that amount of change?
Yeah, it's I think it's quite daunting to a degree. It's daunting because, again, you and I have both worked with and met people who intuitively know that the way an organization needs to work isn't the way the organization is currently working. And they sort of have this inner belief of wanting to do the right thing for the organization. And that can often be misconstrued as almost over-enthusiasm or passion, which many organizations look down on, actually. I've told you before that I was described by one business leader that I worked for as emotionally immature because I wanted to do the right thing for customers. And, you know, ultimately, I'm not emotionally immature. Well, maybe I am in different parts of my life. But, you know, I have a fundamental belief that the reason an organization exists is to fulfill a purpose. And what I want to do is to help the organization I work in or with to be best able to deliver that purpose. I want to give people the skills, the tools to make that a reality. And I want to give people the facts that allow them to understand if we're any good at fulfilling the purpose. Doing all of that it's difficult because it takes a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of courage. And if you're going into this at the beginning of your career and you're thinking, that is one enormous mountain that I've got to climb up, and have I got the effort for it? If you're thinking that, then it's possible this is not the right profession for you. Because anyone that wants to be a customer experience professional, anyone that wants to be an effective customer experience professional is actually excited by how tall the mountain is. They're not looking at it thinking, I can't make that. They're thinking, do you know what? I am going to do whatever it takes to get over that. And maybe it's a bit of a cheesy analogy, but I think it is absolutely representative of the kind of people I meet. You know, our profession is made up of people who do what they do because it's the right thing to do. They don't wait for permission. They very often go against the norm, the political norm in the organization, but they are driven by doing the right thing for the right reason. And I think it's what defines our profession. And it's not enough just to have technical competence. You've got to have that inner belief that this is the right thing to do in combination with that technical competence.
Yes, I think when we think about the folks who have climbed that mountain, who see that mountain, I don't want people who are starting this profession to get discouraged by that big picture, even when they see the mountain and think they can surpass it. Because what inevitably happens is when they're talking with executives, the executives will say things like, you're disrupting, or you're way ahead of where we are. And so we almost have to be that, carrying the flag up that hill and bringing people along, and that can really weigh in on folks too, right? That they feel
Absolutely.
like, oh, I'm just, they hired me to be a change agent, and then it's like they just want to drag me back, or I feel like I'm dragging everybody along. And so that motivation, that capability to motivate, that capability to influence, are all those kind of softer skills, right? Sometimes we talk about this.
Absolutely.
A business case.
I would sum it up in 3 words: adaptability, agility, and humility. As a customer experience professional, every day is going to be different. And that I hate the word expert. I hate the word expert. I hate the word guru, because it doesn't exist in our profession. We are specialists at what we do. And what defines a specialist is that they never stop learning. They never stop advancing what they do. And we have got to demonstrate to the people and the organizations we work in that, we are constantly learning ourselves. We're learning from the good things people do, and we are inspiring people to want to go that next step. But we have got to be humble. If we purvey that we know everything, and if we start hammering people too hard, we start telling people that they're not good, they're bad. That's not how this works. And I've come across too many people in my career who have wanted to steam in, telling leaders, why do you do this to your customers? You shouldn't. That is not how we can be effective. We have got to be the ultimate diplomats. We've got to be the diplomat that teaches the diplomat how to blow smoke up people's behinds if we need to, so they feel good about the things they're doing. But ultimately, we need to be able to give them facts. I spend a lot of time talking about facts. Our job is to help people understand that never-ending need to change. And if we can't convince people of the need for change, then we're not doing our job well enough. It's our job to get the facts, but in a considered, constructive, humble way that allows people to be excited about the opportunity that change brings, as you rightly say, rather than change is something because we're not good enough at what we do.
Mhm, mhm. Can you give an example when, and I probably can too, an example of when you're thinking about that, how do you convince somebody with the facts, right? What are some of the ways or an example of an organization where you've done that, where it's like the light bulb has come on?
I very often leverage what I call voice of the employee to try and get the light bulb to switch on. Because we again, many people listening to this will know that over the years, one of the challenges our profession has been faced with is our use of voice of the customer measurement systems. And very often, our leaders get very overexcited by net promoter scores or customer satisfaction scores that make the business look brilliant. But very often that number isn't reflective of the truth. And so we're struggling with leaders who think that they're doing an amazing job of customer experience. So why do you keep telling me that we're not good enough? And one of, I found, the most effective ways to demonstrate to leaders that we may be in a situation where, whilst it's great having a very positive VOC metric, if it's not telling us the truth, it's going to be very difficult for us to recognize that actually we need to continuously take action to make the experience better. And what I mean by voice of the employee is what I will often do and very regularly do is replicate whatever the customer feedback mechanism is with the customer internally with the employee. Because very often where the customer feedback metric is very high and we know it's too high, if we can demonstrate based on fact that actually our own people think very differently about the experience, and in fact so differently that really, are we really getting the truth from the customer? That can often get people to wake up and smell the coffee, as I often say. And I did this with an organization I worked with last year, and they've been having a number of struggles financially. And I asked 40 of their customer-facing employees, you know, if you were a customer, would you use this company? And it was a business-to-business organization. Would you use this company? And I expected the answer to be bad, but not as bad as it was, because every single person in the room said, no way, I wouldn't use this company. I would go somewhere else. Now, that is hard, cold fact. And how we use that kind of hard, cold fact is important. You know, what I didn't want to do is to slap the CEO of this organization around the face with it. But what I was able to do was to share that very powerful fact that said, you know what, quite frankly, unless we can change that, until we can get this business into a position where your own people would be prepared to use you, we're going to find it very difficult to transform either the customer experience or the financial performance of the organization. And it's hugely powerful. As I say, if we use this in a constructive way rather than as a stick to beat them around the head with.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear, and again, don't want to put you on the spot, I'd love to hear if you've got an example as well.
Oh yeah, I can recall another company that I worked with as well. And when we went to the organization, they started and they were getting the score and they were getting all the information in, and really kind of NPS was all the buzz, and they were doing an okay job and things were moving ahead. But when we went to the organization, each of the stakeholders, and started to really ask them, you know, what are the goals? What's the purpose that you have within the organization? What's the purpose you have for the customers as they interact with us? And nobody said it was a score. They said, I really want customers to feel this way about our brand, and I want them to buy more, and I want them to tell others about us, right? So those goals and having them identified and then saying, we as an organization can help achieve that, all of us together, was a way for them to say, oh, I see that this is a way for me to achieve the organization's goals, not just a score or a survey or voice of customer coming in, right? I think that's one of the pieces. So you kind of have to start where people are. I think that's one of the things as you said, when people come in and they're waving the flag and they're trying to beat people up with things, I think you have to kind of carry them along and make sure you're explaining the steps and what's involved to each step. I mean, it's just good change management, right? And that to me is one of the skill sets when we talked about competencies that none of us are change management experts. I mean, even if you think you know it, right, as you said, an expert, I think we all end up learning what works in different situations. What worked in one company for me didn't work in another, and so we always have to adapt. That was one of the terms that you used, and I think it's the same thing with helping the organization to change, because that's really what we're trying to do in the end, right?
Absolutely right.
Experience, yeah. Yeah.
And that adaptability is not, that's not something that you can learn from a textbook. It's something that you learn the more you do this. And I think it's why, the professional qualification that we are so supportive of and passionate about is an experiential one, because we need to have been in various different situations. I regularly speak to peers of mine who are working in very difficult situations in organizations that don't get it, that don't buy into the need for change. And these people they're in need of both counseling, reassuring, and a hug. But that's what our community is all about, because what they're going through is typical, and it's for us to support each other and to recognize that that is typical, and that's what we're there for. That's why we're needed. And in those situations, what we have got to do is continually ask ourselves, are we trying to do the right thing? And I always said to my teams when I was on the inside of organizations, if we're doing the right things for the right reason, then we must do it. Do it. We've got nothing to lose. This is not about personal gain. And what I strongly believe is behind the success of the most successful, effective CX professionals around the world is where their desire to do this is primarily for the benefit of the organization. It cannot be about us in the short term. If it is, you will not be effective. And is this? I don't want people to be playing violins, the way I'm describing this. But you have to give your soul away. You have to give everything to the organisation for this to work. And I've had the pleasure of meeting some amazing customer experience professionals, many of whom are still in role. They're still in an organisation, helping their organisations transform. And they are inspirational people. Does their organisation know how lucky they are to have them? In many cases, no. Do they care? No, because that's not what drives them. What drives them is that desire to keep doing the right thing. And they will get the benefit in the end. And it sounds so evangelistic, and I'm sometimes at risk of sounding evangelistic, but I cannot stress just how important that is to the success of doing what we do within organizations and supporting them from the outside.
I think it's a really great point and a key component of what we have to do every day in really painting that picture for folks and giving them this is where we're headed and this is the reason that we're headed there, and continuing to do that. I'll hark back to something that you said, and I think it's a real component of what we find with our members, those of you listening to this webinar, is I'm not crazy, you're not crazy, and you're not alone. I think it's one of the things as we're kind of beating our head against the wall and our foreheads are bloody from running into the brick wall 10 times and we're feeling like people just don't get it. It's nice to be in an environment and talk with other folks and say, yep, you know what, that's normal, that's part of it. It feels a little bit like therapy, but you know what, it's a tough job. If somebody would have said, this is what you're getting yourself into, you'd say, wow, that's incredible, scary, but incredible. And I think it's that ability to keep that as you're helping people through change. I mean, it's a lot of kind of, sometimes I say Sherpa, and sometimes you're carrying people along, sometimes you're pushing, sometimes you're leading. That's exhausting, but exhilarating at the same time. So if people feel like they're on an emotional roller coaster, That's what it is.
Do you know that what's sad is that what's actually normal are the behaviours that we fight against, and that's the irony of this, is that the way organisations work in putting the business before the customer or the employee, that's what's become normal over the years. And so what we are trying to do is to, in a way, reinvent the way organisations work. But I don't want that to sound as though it's, you know, something magical, because it's not. Because actually, the things we talk about are blindingly obvious. It's not complex, but when you're trying to fight against the norm, that is very difficult to do. And that's why in the article I described it as a revolution alongside evolution, because, you know, if you're going to fight against what's become normal, you know, can you just sit there and let it happen sort of naturally, or do we need to actually make it something that becomes a movement, you know, a definitive intentional revolution that gets people to realize that what's become normal shouldn't be. And you know, sadly, I keep using the word sadly, maybe I need to be more glasses half full like you, Diane, but I think in a way, one of the reasons why customer experience, or the customer experience that people are actually having, isn't too dissimilar, apart from technology, as it was 20 years ago, is that in many cases, the management of customer experience has become too formulaic. And so what people are doing, yes, we've got an NPS score, yes, we've mapped a journey, yes, you know, yes, we've got a customer persona, but it's like people have defaulted to the normal way organizations work, which is with checkboxes and tasks. And customer experience is not about checkboxes and tasks. And just because we've measured Net Promoter Score for 15 years doesn't mean we're any good at customer experience. What we need to do is to reimagine this and constantly reinvent it, and constantly hold the mirror up to ourselves and say, are we actually doing what's necessary? And that is what is not happening too often around the world at the moment.
I would agree. I think it's part of that designing the experience for the human and the improvement of their life. I mean, we would think, I often ask this question, if you were designing this experience for yourself, what would you expect, and how would you want to feel at the end of that experience? I think people kind of lose that whole empathy for who they are as a person and what they would expect, and having that impact. I think you're absolutely right, Ian. Also, it's a balance between doing those things that you're talking about to move change and get people to understand and drive the change, but also continuing, on the other hand, so it's like a yin-yang thing, to make sure we're understanding what that human is, what they're trying to do, how they're feeling about it, what they're trying to accomplish in their life. I mean, none of us wake up thinking, I'm going to go touch 20 brands today, and here's the experience that I want, right? We're just going about our lives and really having those interactions, and the way we feel about those interactions is what really drives us to either go back or do anything else. So your point is well taken. That revolution needs to be about the business becoming more human, and really relating to what's happening in the world. Absolutely. Tell me a little bit more about the revolution piece. So if you had a crystal ball and you said in 3 years, Ian's vision or Ian's world is about this, what would be some of the things that you would change about how we're going about our profession, or things that we need to learn? You've already talked about a few, but share with me what you think that looks like. So I think that fundamentally what you've just described is at the heart of all of this. What we need as a profession is to continually be able to almost go beyond customer experience to human experience. And I think we've been very effective in the last 7 years, especially, at changing the language. You know, in fact, it is the Customer Experience Professionals Association that actually has created the CX acronym. That didn't exist 7 years ago. You know, CX has become part of the business language,
despite the fact there are still many people that don't really understand what it means yet. But changing the language is one thing. I think what is missing far too often is that whilst we've been very influential as a profession at engaging with middle management and often below that, and getting especially customer-facing functions very excited about this, I think we are a long way away from transforming the mindset of people who run these organizations. The C-suite, for want of a better description. And what's interesting is that you only have to attend a customer experience event, a conference, an awards ceremony, a CXPA networking meeting. And if you are ever to meet someone from the C-suite of a big organization at that meeting, you know, I will give you $100 because they're not there. They're not present. You know, but if you go to a big marketing event, you know, it's very likely you'll see the CMO there. You'll see, we're still not seen as something that is relevant enough for it to be on the direct radar of the C-suite. And the misconnection between the C-suite and the rest of the organization is still so extreme all over the world that has to be the thing that changes. And my crystal ball, I think what I would love to see happening more over the next 3 years is, as well as us continuing to try and influence the C-suite, I think we need to spend as much time doing that as a profession as we do investing in educating the next generation of leader. I think, you know, still today, the curriculum in higher education around the world doesn't even talk about customer experience. And these are the new leaders that are coming, and it's not there. And I think that there is an element of what we do. It is, if this is genuinely about us doing what's right for organizations, for employees, for customers, for shareholders, it's our duty to try and ensure that we educate the next generation as much as we do try and transform the way the existing generation think. And that means us giving up our time. That means us doing things pro bono. That means us, you know, continuing to write about what we do and reach people that actually, going forward, they will make this kind of thing happen. You know, if we're sincere about our profession, that is what we need to be focusing on.
So have you had I talked a lot about folks who will come to me and say, you know, my executives don't get it. They're all about the quarterly revenue numbers, and they'll talk a good talk until we get down to the last of the quarter, and then it's all about dollars. What have you seen work with executives? If somebody's facing that right now, or they have the C-suite who's really focused on that revenue, what would you recommend that they do? What kind of conversation should they be having?
Yeah, so I mean, it is the perennial challenge that I and all of our peers face on a daily basis. But I think it's one of the amazing strengths of our community is that there are so many people now around the world who have been able to prove definitively the connection between improving the customer experience and financial performance and the commercial performance of the organization. And very often people will say to me, my leader doesn't get this, you know, what can I do? But for every organization I meet in one part of the world, it is extremely likely that I know a peer of theirs in another part of the world, in a non-competing market, who has already proven what they need to try and prove. I was with a bank in Dubai last week, and they haven't yet proven the numbers. But I know of a bank in Austria who has. And so they're in non-competing markets, so I'm going to connect them to each other. Now, this is not about personal gain for me, but this is what our community can do. The other thing that I'm hugely a huge advocate of is a principle that I learned from Curtis Bingham, who's the chair of the Chief Customer Officers Council. I'm sure you know Curtis, who he talks about the principle of borrowing authority, and I share this with everyone that listens to me. And I think we must not be afraid of borrowing the authority of others. I have found very often the best way to get a leader to wake up and smell the coffee is not for me to tell them, not for you to tell them, but for me to bring in a peer of theirs. You know, bring in a leader from another business, a chief operating officer or a CEO, someone that's doing it in a different company, and get them to tell them. You know, that is so powerful. They know we get it, but when they hear it from someone else, you know, that's when they'll think, oh, actually, maybe this, you know, this crazy CX guy is right. And it's amazing how many business leaders who have done this and achieved a success, they are so happy to talk about it because, you know, it validates that they're doing great things. So really, I suppose that in short, in answer to that question, it is, you know, network with your peers, and that's what this profession is wonderful at doing, but also see if you can get leaders from other organizations in different industries who would be happy to share their story with your leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is a great technique to get those folks to connect to other people who have gone through it. It's interesting when you talk to those C-suites or executives who have gone through the transformation, they often say, I could see where I wanted the organization to go, but I couldn't see how to get that done. And sometimes it's when the light bulbs came on for them that it was the ability for somebody to work across the organization who was going to really bring that customer, you know, the customer experience to bear and say, this is what we know is important because this is what pays our paycheck. This is what makes us real. People buying more, staying, coming, you know, staying with the organization. All those things make an impact. So I think it's a great combination, and sometimes it's just an unrealized connecting of the dots with those executives. They talk to somebody else, they hear the financial impact, they start to kind of put those pieces together, and they have a word for it. Sometimes they think about customer experience as being, oh, I got to check the box, that's NPS. But when you really educate them about what it is and what it can do for the organization, being more agile, innovative, collaborative, right? All the things CEOs say they want.
Absolutely.
In that language, then they say, oh, yeah, I'd kind of like some of that. And then they realize on the other side, and why they're so passionate is, I didn't realize that's what customer experience really was.
Exactly right.
Like they just didn't have any idea that was it. They just thought it was this thing they had to plug into their organization.
Exactly. And you know what? That education thing, it can be very subtle. You know, I always say to people that there's a particular thing that I talk about when I share knowledge with people around the things that customer-centric leaders should be doing. And I always say to people that, you know, if you're going to print out any page of the material that I share with people and surreptitiously leave it on the corner of a leader's desk, you know, that, and you know, sometimes printing things off and giving it to your boss, sending them links to articles that a thought leader has written, you know, buying them a book, you know, Outside In is a book that many of our profession get a huge amount of value reading. You know, doing those things, just give it to them. You know, I thought you might be interested in this. You'd be amazed how many leaders will actually read those things and will think, you know what, I found that really quite interesting. And the only other thing that I would suggest as well, and this is not necessarily as easy to do, but one of the groups of stakeholders that are often not forgotten, but we don't necessarily consider in influencing, are the shareholders of organizations, many of whom are not there day to day. Very often there are non-executive directors who don't have day-to-day involvement, but they actually are hugely influential in the direction of the organization. Don't forget that they could be the perfect people to borrow authority from, because you convince the shareholders of the value of this, they will then help you to convince the board of directors or the C-suite. So it's, again, that there is no black or white answer to this. Obviously, we've got to adapt to every situation, but there are so many different ways that we need to consider doing this, which highlights the importance of adaptability and agility.
You know, it's interesting that you say that. I think it's looking at really also what the market is going to start to expect. So a couple of examples of that. I was working with an organization, you know, trying to redo their RFP process. And one of the things they said is, you know, we're getting RFPs now that are requiring us to talk about our CX program, what we're doing around experience and how we're changing the organization. Not what are your scores, but what are you doing and how you culturally are. So we see that piece. One organization I talked to was interested in doing this. It was actually an executive team that called and said, our board is asking us what we're doing in this area because they're reading and understanding this is a game changer, this is differentiation, this is a necessary part of doing business and how you do business. And so we're seeing, I think, more of that influence where it's not just you having to say, I've got to push this rock uphill, I've got to convince this executive team, but we're seeing now that it's coming kind of full circle. You can't go anywhere and not hear about it. The problem I think that you pointed out, and I find this all the time, is people have a preconceived notion when they hear customer experience what that is. And so I think it's sometimes just asking a very simple question to the executives to say, what do you think that is, and helping them to understand the transformation, the efforts, the changes, the collaboration, all those words I talked about, to get them to really begin to understand or be curious. I think curiosity is looking about what they're curious about, and then, like you said, finding things to say, you know, you wanted to hear about how organizations were collaborative or agile or the other terms. Here's a little article about that. Here's what one company did, or, you know, pick up the phone if you said and call someone. So I think we're getting some help from the outside marketplace. While there's all this confusion going on about DX and CX and UX and all of the pieces, it all fits together and it all kind of angles toward, in the end, that human experience has to come out. And so I think, just like you said, once we get them kind of on that path and they discover for themselves, we get that support that we need.
Absolutely right.
Any of those techniques you and I just talked about, right, are all part of what our association, I think, helps support. Really that thought leadership about, what did you do in this situation? Here's where I was struggling. You're right. It's almost like therapy. Which is good.
Absolutely. You know what? There are so many of us in our community that are delighted to share our stories and the examples of things we've gone through. I mean, I had the pleasure of being one of the CX experts, despite the fact I don't like the expert word. But it's fascinating being on that panel, because I see the responses that my peers give to people that send in their questions. And, you know, it's enlightening to hear the way different people answer questions, because we've all had very different experiences. But that's what's wonderful about this, because I learn something every day, and that makes me better able to help the people that ask me questions. And so, you know, I don't get paid anything to say nice things about the CXPA. I say nice things about the CXPA because it is a part of what I do. You know, this is my family, if you like, my work family. And I couldn't operate as a customer experience professional without it, because I need to know that I've got that safety blanket of thousands of professionals all over the world who are all trying to do the same thing. And I know that if I've got a problem, I'm not sure what to do, I can reach out and there will be someone there to help me.
So if somebody is on listening and they've been at this for, say, the usual kind of a year, 18 months, what would be some of the advice that you'd give them in this revolutionary time of our profession?
So the biggest advice I would give them is that they have to maintain a sense of realism throughout. What they are doing is not easy. What they are involved in is a long-term business strategy, and there will be days where they will want to come in to work and jump off the highest part of the building because there is just no hope. And there will be other days where they come in where they think that the world has suddenly transformed in the way they want it to. But the following day, it will go back to how it was before. And so the advice I can give them is that they've got to have a sense of where they want this to go. So having an idea of what they want the experience to be, even if the organization hasn't defined it, is important. They've got to feel that this is something that is in here, okay? That this has got to be something that they care about. If it isn't, then they should strongly question whether or not being a customer experience professional is the right thing for them in the long term. They must not be afraid to reach out and ask for help. Do not just try and swim against the tide continuously. Ask for help. There are people out there who will help you. Make sure you do. And the most important thing is that you must never rest on your laurels, and continuing to develop your own authority, earning authority, so that people will see you as the specialist that has a hugely important role to play in the organization is vital. And getting the professional qualification, for example, is one very valuable way of earning that authority. But you've got to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. You have got to show your organization that the things you're talking about aren't just nice, soft, fluffy theory, but you've got to prove that the things you're doing are making a difference. And it comes back to what you said earlier in asking me about the importance of fact. This cannot just be us evangelizing. We have got to turn this into hard, cold fact that allows the organization to realize that this is the right direction to go in.
Yeah. We have a couple of comments, Ian, and one of them is about this fact that, when we talked initially at the beginning, and I feel like this is where a lot of people are, that sometimes it's referred to as an initiative or a program. And I'm the same. The comment we have is kind of, that makes me cringe, and I think that's exactly the way that I feel too, because that means there's an end to it, and that there's an output. Well, there is an output. It never ends. You and I, even doing this for a long period of time, and many other folks who are long timers in this field, I learn every day. And I think it's a matter of what's going to change, what's around the corner, what can I learn that will really help me to build those particular pieces. And I think it's a little bit too of helping, as you said, the C-suite to come along, helping them to really realize what's happening, especially in big organizations. I think your comment about making sure you're keeping track of where you are, you're recognizing your success, you have a plan for where you're headed, and you're celebrating your achievements and what's happening. Because I think sometimes we say, oh great, I got over that little part of the hill, right, I got to charge to the next one. And we don't stop and celebrate enough about where we are and the effort we've put forth. So I find that a lot. I don't know if it's just part of the personality of folks in this field, but we don't stop and really think about how much it took to accomplish those small things.
But again, this is where that word revolution comes in again, because if we're going to change this, what we need is to build momentum, and we build momentum by turning people into advocates of the principle of customer experience. And what we've got to do as a profession is not do this to people, but we've got to give them the knowledge so they can do it for themselves. And this is hugely important. Customer experience is not about teaching, in my opinion. It is about sharing knowledge. And what we've got to do is to arm people with the knowledge, the enthusiasm, the belief that they can make this happen. And if you give people belief that things can change, that's when a revolution starts. And that's why if we just sit and wait for it to happen, wait for leaders to make it happen, that is where we will be relying on evolution. Mm-hmm. And evolution can take a long time because we don't know how long that's going to take. And so if we can't, in my opinion, we can't afford to wait for this continuing evolution. What we've got to do is to arm more people with the knowledge so the movement gets bigger. And that movement is not aggressive movement. You know, so there's the articles I write get syndicated to a variety of places, and on one particular site there is been a very protracted conversation that's gone on about this revolution versus evolution. And someone wrote that they don't think it should be a revolution because that's what they've seen happen too often, and the revolution has been too aggressive and too hard-hitting. And I agree. When I say revolution, I don't mean aggressively, but I mean it is building a big group of people within your business who all believe in the same thing, and collectively together, you know, the combination of your skill and knowledge and capability is what ultimately will influence the change of the organization far more effectively than you trying to do it by yourself.
Oh, heaven, Jess, I say that all the time about it's one light bulb at a time, right? That's what you have to do every day. Just like get that one person to have that thought or that feeling or the, oh, I get it, or I see where my purpose is, or I'm engaging because I believe in where we're headed. I think that's why we're seeing the influx of really this employee experience and engagement too, being just as important, that they're customers of the brand, because it really does take every single person working, you know, rowing that boat, being on board and really marching to the beat of the same drum up that mountain.
Exactly.
Successful. So
another. You know, what's funny is when you build that revolution, you know, people start coming out of the woodwork. You know, people who you never thought would believe in customer experience, you know, they suddenly sort of appear in the back of the room saying, hi, yeah, but you're in finance. It's like, yeah, I know, but I love this stuff. You know, and that's what gets you to the point where you think, do you know what, this can change. This can change, because once that finance guy goes back into the finance team and starts telling them what's going on, then you start to see the momentum shifting in the right direction.
Yeah, it's those, I call them organic champions, right? That kind of are just naturals at it. You've been in a workshop where it's the one guy who just like gets it, and he's like got this look on his face like, this is what I've been trying to do, right? But then also, as you said, the care and feeding of the knowledge sharing and this is what it is and this is how it can happen, because the Johnny Appleseed is you let them go back out into the organization and they're doing the championship. So don't think you have to go it alone, right? That's the message.
Absolutely, no, absolutely.
Find those people who can be your virtual champion and either formalize that. Some people have CX councils made up of those folks, or your champion networks or advocates, whatever you call them. But that really tends to give you a lot further reach, because if you try to do it yourself, it's not going to exist. And you should, because I mean, I'm first to admit it, right? I don't have all the best ideas. I need people around me to help me say, yeah, you're off your rocker if you think that's going to work, or hey, let's twist that up. So using that group as this is the momentum, this is creating together, this is really kind of building the best of all worlds, especially when you have across the organization. So.
And it's back to the point that customer experience, whilst we have to have the authority to share the knowledge, it can't be about us. You know, it's not about us. And I've made that mistake in the past where people saw customer experience as me. You know, that is not what you want to happen. You know, it has to be about everyone in the organization. And in fact, the biggest success is when you know that you are no longer necessary in that role, that sort of idealistic role of transforming the organization, because you now know that you have 2,000 Dianes or 2,000 Ians in the organization, and actually it's embedded itself into the way it works. That should be the ultimate aspiration, but there are very few organizations around the world that are anywhere near getting to that point.
And I think it's important to recognize when you do get there. I recall I share a story sometimes about, you know, at one organization, very operationally focused, right? Everything was about the bottom line, supply chain, right? It was just, you know, I was kind of a black sheep in the organization. But I recall the very first executive meeting where it was somebody else besides me saying, what would the customer say about this? I mean, I felt like it was like, drop the mic. I can leave. My work wasn't done, obviously, but it was just that recognition that those small, tiny things that you see happen are like, score. I got, somebody's brain, that light bulb went on, somebody's brain is there. And that momentum, when it begins and continues, it's really important. So celebrate those small wins, because sometimes they are really momentous when you really see the shift of where an organization goes. If you look back over, you've been doing this a year and a half, you got to take credit for some of those things and give the organization credit for the changes they've made, and recognize that for folks. It's important.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
All right, we're almost to the end of our session, Ian. Any closing thoughts?
It's always so wonderful to talk about this. To talk about customer experience with anyone is great, but when you and I get together to talk about it, it sort of unlocks so many different thoughts in my mind. And I don't want anyone listening to this to think that I am being negative about the development of customer experience around the world. It is developing at a huge pace. There is no doubt about it. What I'm saying is that fundamental change is what isn't happening. And the reason why it's important for us to recognize that is that it is why the skills, capabilities, and competencies that make our profession are more important now than ever before. Organizations have got to where they have, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the US, Australia, the UK, or anywhere in between. They've got to where they have largely by accident, or because they've had someone as crazy as you and I on the inside dragging people kicking and screaming. That's not enough for us to see genuine, tangible, demonstrable change. Some of the most customer-centric organizations in the world were created in that way. Unfortunately, the majority of organizations around the world are legacy businesses that weren't created that way. Mm-hmm. And so there is still a huge amount of work to be done. There are not nearly enough CX professionals in the world. There are not nearly enough CCXPs in the world. And so those of us working in this profession, I think it is wonderful that this is what drives you, but we need more. We need more of you. We need to keep going. We need to keep doing the things we're doing. We need to keep supporting each other. And, as I say to everyone, the more CCXPs there are in the world, the better place the world will be. And I have personally found my vocation, and I will do this until my dying day. And I do look forward, hopefully, in 10 years' time, when I can say that more of us are having consistently good experiences. And I say 10 years intentionally, because this is not going to change overnight. But we've got to keep doing what we're doing, and hopefully we will get there.
Well, thank you, Ian, for being such a passionate champion for CX. I'm sure folks listening to you are thinking, I have hope. I've got a place I can come. I can see where things are headed, and they're part of that revolution. So thank you for that inspiration today.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks. Happy CX Day, everybody. Check out more of our webinars and our online resources to find out more about CXPA and how the community can help support you in what you're doing. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.